Hi, Andrea. This is my oral presentation for English. Today I'm going to be talking about the importance of nutrition in early childhood, the role nutrition plays in early childhood development, and the implications of nutritional deficits for later childhood and adulthood. So, good nutrition means getting the right balance of foods and nutrients. In Canada, we look to the Canada Food Guide to provide us with those guidelines. And I've provided a link to the guide in my reference section of the PowerPoint presentation that I've sent you. Now, most people, when they think of malnutrition, they think about developing countries where there's food shortages and poverty and just basically a lack of food. And that is true, and that half of the world's child deaths every year are caused by malnutrition. But the problem is a bit more complex. Here in Canada, we have something called food insecurity. And that's not necessarily a lack of food. What that means is that families have enough food, but they're not getting the proper nutrition, in that the food they are buying is less nutrient dense than recommended in the Canada Food Guide. So their bellies are full, but their bodies are starving. In fact, 40% of families in Canada suffer from some type of food insecurity. And most of those families have incomes well above the poverty level. Now, children who come from families who suffer from food insecurity are 90% more likely to have health problems, 31% more likely to spend time in hospital, and 76% more likely to have cognitive, language, and behavioral developmental problems. So the role of nutrition in brain development is incredibly complex. Irregular eating, food insecurity, and the damage that it causes depends on the duration and the amount of the nutritional deficits. So malnourishment reduces brain cell production, it reduces brain cell size, and it reduces the connectivity between the neurons. So there's less communication between the brain cells. Now, malnutrition affects cell division throughout the whole body, but cell division stops in the brain first. So if your body is starving, brain cell production will stop in your brain first and foremost. And what they have found is that children who are malnourished have 20 to 60% less brain DNA than children who receive the proper nutrients. Now, how this affects cognition is that it affects attention, it affects memory, it affects inhibitory controls, it affects learning, spatial skills, problem solving, language, emotional regulation, and behavior. And a 2017 study of 1,500 children discovered that children with poor nutritional status have impaired social functioning. So what they realized, what brain areas that play an important role in social development and social behaviors are greatly impacted by poor nutrition. The poorer the nutrition that these children had, the worse the impairments were. So the areas of social functioning that were affected was exploratory behavior, verbalizations, friendliness, and the ability of these children to engage with other children and adults. Now, you may not think this is a big deal, but the implications are, and what we know about how children learn mean that these children who have these social impairments are not exploring their environment, they're not engaging verbally, they're not engaging socially, and this is how children create these rich, stimulating environments, and this is how they enhance their brain function, this is how they learn, and this is how play-based learning works, basically. And they discovered that it creates a lower IQ in these children. Like by age 3, this was visible, and they tested children at age 3, age 5, and age 7, and it was consistent across all ages. And low IQ has been seen to be the single best replicable risk factor for antisocial behavior and aggression in children. So physically, malnutrition affects children, affects smaller overall size, lower weight, smaller muscular skeletal, decrease in fine motor skills. So why is this so important? Why is nutrition, specifically in early childhood, so important? Well, in the early years, the brain is doing its most growth and development. So the infant brain by the age of 1 has doubled in size. By the age of 3, the brain is 80% of its adult size. And brain development depends on adequate nutrition. So are these things correctable? And the answer to that is no. Most studies have found that by the age of 2, if a child has been consistently malnourished, that the effects on the brain are irreversible. So you cannot change them. This is according to the World Health Organization. So on a micro level, you can see that with folic acid deficits, like within 21 to 28 days gestation, if there's not enough folic acid in the mum, then the fetus develops neural tube defects. Vitamin D deficits in early childhood have links to schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and antisocial behavior. Choline and B12, which is responsible for the integrity of the brain and the spinal cord, deficits cause massive problems with those. So on a macro level, what we're seeing is that kids with nutrient deficiencies, which are at age 3, have life course persistent antisocial behavior and aggression. We're seeing increases in obesity because food insecurity. The quality of food is, well, it's normally high fat and high sugar and leads to obesity. Also the cognitive deficits, the impairments that they have in terms of inhibitory control, and emotion regulation, they say, is a link to obesity later in life as well. So it, it has huge impacts on adult physical health, immunity, rates of illness, hospitalization, childhood social development affects adults' physical, mental health, their well-being, their longevity, their rates of chronic disease. You see attention deficits in early childhood that carry on to middle and later adulthood. So malnutrition in early childhood, you see a decrease in academic performance across childhood. You see a 50% in reduction in future wages for adults, and children who are malnourished are 70% more likely to live in poverty as adults. There's hundreds of millions of children worldwide that suffer from malnutrition and nutrient deficiencies. It has a detrimental effect in early childhood and a persistent effect going into adulthood on children's cognitive skills, their social emotional skills, their physical development, and it's permanent. Anyway, thank you for listening, and yeah.